Hi. I got to get more questions. Sasha. Hold on. I'll get him connected too.
I don't know where she went. I don't know where she went. Any ideas? Just a little something, maybe. You go ahead and I'll have a little taste of whatever. Plums? You mean plums? Do we have plums? I mean plums? You mean dates? Plums? Prunes. Hmm.
Mobile phone is
Yeah, I'm going to turn that off, I think.
you don't need to?
Yeah, no, I'll turn that off.
Oh, crunchy berries?
No.
Huh?
Those are breakfast.
ID number. It's his.
Could you check your microphone?
Yeah, I
I can barely hear you.
I'm getting him connected. It's saying he's got the wrong ID. I was doing a test run. I've got to re-invite him. So it says invite Gmail. Sorry, this is my first time using this. We can't be in the same room where it gives feedback. Okay, you want to sit in front of this one here? We'll squeeze in. Okay, hold on. Come here then. Chair.
Using headphones because
Put it in my hand.
we have two people now. Get this out of the way. Okay.
Keep the noise out of it now.
Okay.
Keep it quiet.
Yes, it's fine. You just want me to be in the
Okay, let's see. Can you hear us, Dan?
Yes, I can hear you fine now.
Okay.
Tip it down a little, honey.
This is it. It's either you're going to raise your seat up.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. That's not the best connection here for this. I'm too short. There we go. Hi. Now what I wanted to do is, see, I can't read anything now. I was going to use my screen.
Don't you
All
have
right.
split the screen? I'll show you how.
Wait,
You can get more than one thing at the same time. You go like this, You make this any size you want by catching the corner.
Right. I know, but you got to set the thing here.
And then you get the other one on too.
Or do you do it here somehow? There you go. That's on it. Okay. Anyway, don't worry about it. I don't need to do anything. All right. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Okay. So,
We got to negentropy it.
yeah, I had all my notes on another screen. I didn't print it, but I could split it screen somehow. But anyway, we'll just do it this way. Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Aquarian Radio at aquarianradio.com. I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host right here, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And we have a very special guest, Dan Winter. Dan, welcome to our show today. Would you like to, since I can't pull up the bio, would you like to explain to everybody, our listeners, who you are and a little bit about your research to get us started here?
Sure, I'm Dan Winter with Implosion Group. The main website is goldenmean.info and fractalfield.com. My trainings with IBM as a systems analyst and graduate work in psychophysiology and biofeedback. I've been teaching physics of consciousness kinds of things for about 30 years. And currently we're involved in zero-point energy research and vacuum coherence research and plasma rejuvenation field research and a lot of advanced stuff. And some of that stuff has to do with the ancient story of what Enki and Hermes were about. So it's all beautiful.
Excellent. So there's a lot of information, a lot of ground to cover here. And where did you want to start? Dr. Lessin's been up most of the night, and he was studying a lot of your stuff. So where do you want to start with the question?
Well, I just love the way you've brought all kinds of speculation down to its physical aspect, the physiochemical aspect, and how we can use the principles of coherence and negantropy to heal, to extend our life, to have numinous experiences. That's really greatly interests me.
Right. So let's get some of the terms. What is negantropy and physical coherence and all that stuff?
Yeah, we do think that, the key turning point of the ancients was when they discovered how to make the electric field of negentropy, which is the opposite of entropy. Entropy being moving toward disorder. So negentropy means essentially self-organization, which is self-organizing. And we believe that the turning point in ancient civilizations was what they called a Shem, which was electric field, stones making an electric field, aberrate life,
Shut up some. We're getting a little bit of interference with the computers. Hold on. We're going to shut down some computers to make sure we get a better connection. Hold on. 1 second, everybody. We want to have the best connection here. All righty. Let's try that again. This is our first time on Zoom, and we're going across the planet. We're literally 12 hours apart.
We're in Maui, and you're in the Pyrenees, in the French or the Spanish side?
Yeah, we're on the French side of the Pyrenees, not too far from Perpignan, on beautiful Mount Canigou, and it's very nice here.
Okay.
To continue the talk about the self-organization, the core focus, which is my new book, Origins of Biologic Negentropy, is that we believe we've identified the frequency signature with a very simple equation for all biologic self-organization, which is Planck length and time times exact integer exponents of golden ratio being perfect phase conjugation. The neat thing is that the symbol for phase conjugation is literally the symbol for Hermes Thos, the caduceus.
So did Thoth Hermes discover this? Is that what you're saying? And that's how
Well, clearly, you guys have been spending a lot of time studying the ancient literature about the Anunnaki.
Right.
I think we would agree that that literature is full of their descriptions of their problems with accelerated aging upon arrival here. And clearly, regardless of the personality story, which is debatable, but that Enki's chief science officer, who had been the Thoth Hermes, also known as Dawid and Thule, that he was part of what Anton Parks called the Kadistu, or life designers. Mm-hmm. And one of their primary skills was the ability to make a bioactive electric field, which, Zecharia Sitchin spent years studying the Sumerian term, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. And he decided that Shem meant high word firestone, which we now know means implosive capacitor, a bioactive field generator. Literally, the root of the term chem and chemistry and alchemy and Sheman and scheme and schematic, you can transliterate the term Shem, meaning quite literally access to a black hole.
Right. And isn't there a singularity of black hole within everything and everybody and every closed system? I'm talking about Nassim Haramehn's research about how there's...
Indeed. It appears that if you understand what causes an object fall to the ground, which is the phase conjugate cause of gravity, that what we're calling a proton, for example, is a little black hole, in the sense that its centripetal force or gravity-making power comes from the golden ratio in its structure, causing charge implosion. Specifically, my new equation for the radii of hydrogen showed the exact exponents of Planck length and time predicted the radii of hydrogen, meaning that the top-down view of hydrogen is kind of like 10 golden spirals, the same as the top-down view of DNA. And that means that as the charge would approach the center, the phase velocity of that charge could add and multiply recursively, constructively, because of golden ratio. And that adding and multiplying the phase velocity towards center is the only cause of gravity and the only reason that objects fall to the ground. So golden ratio, perfected phase conjugation, is the cause of gravity and all centripetal and negentropic forces. And you could call that a black hole. It is the centripetal force that creates charge acceleration towards center. Remember, charge acceleration is the only definition of gravity.
Charge acceleration.
In the descriptions of Tahuti or Thoth setting up a sacred site, he exactly encoded that ratio so that you would be surrounded by a structure that amplified that. And he also did something to preserve the energy within his temples from the telluric energy that might interfere with it or overload people.
It's true that the relationship to gravity was essential to the temple, that the way in which the temple was placed was always at a magnetic line cross point and aligned with the Hartmann and Pei ray, etc., all for the purpose of creating a negentropic centripetal field. And the way to find out if you have a temple is to make electric measurements. You find a high dielectric constant, which is charge distribution efficiency. The way Korotkov measured sacred space, for example, he followed the Kugi to where they made phone calls to their ancestors and proved that the air is more fractal, meaning charge distribution efficiency, defines where you can make phone calls to ancestors. And that definition of sacred space is similar to deciding that you only pay your architect when you measure that the building made the electric field that causes a seed to grow, which means that people who build, architects who design steel and aluminum buildings would never get paychecks because that would cause seeds to die. Oh. Whereas that causes seeds to grow is the implosive capacitance of biologic materials, being that biologic materials make a living building which breathes capacitance for life force, Chi, Orgone, Baraka, Shaktipat, because every living molecule that got to be part of life is shoved closer into fractal geometry called high dielectric constant or a phase conjugate dielectric, which is equivalent to the term orgone.
Yeah, I understand you made a device that allows one to sacralize any space into a temple that can take you there.
We have built several structures that create sacred space. One you can see at purify.com, Pyraphi, purify.com. And you see it's basically a gold pyramid structure designed to make the same kind of capacitance the Ark of the Covenant did. And we made replicable measures. We accelerated fermentation rate 40% every time with a zero power input capacitor. We made a bioactive field. Interestingly, we think the Ark of the Covenant, being the same kind of capacitor, gold-golden ratio over acacia wood high dielectric, made the kind of capacitance that could safely contain radioactive materials. So the centripetal capacitance, implosive capacitance, reduces radioactivity the same way focused human attention does, because it creates a centripetal field.
Wait, so focused human attention can reduce radioactivity. So could we?
I believe Uri Geller made those measures initially.
Yeah.
Bill Tiller showed focused human attention compresses electric fields measurably in his book, Conscious Acts of Creation. The history story of the Ark of the Covenant is relevant here because we believe the Anunnaki were such lousy navigators, they only could nuke their way through the Van Allen belts, and they needed something to hold the nukes. And that was the Ark of the Covenant, which was an implosive capacitor, which also generated the voltage necessary to make the gold powder, which was their main cottage industry. Interestingly, when the Ark of the Covenant was stolen,
we're having little problems.
it resulted in radioactive poison, which is French paint.
So slow this down a little bit. So for those who aren't familiar with the story, Alalu had to blast through the asteroid belt, and he stole the nukes when he was dethroned from the throne of Nibiru. This is the story in the Sumerian as translated by Sitchin and probably Kramer as well. And so Enki, though, when he came through later, he used water blasters, and that's why he's known as Aquarius. And so there's two different stories. So he must have discovered something that, how he could get through without having to use. And you're saying it's the Ark of the Covenant, but it probably wasn't in that original container. It was probably just a technology. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, it's clear that the ancients had nuclear weapons. There's nuclear molten glass on the Sinai Plateau. And I think you're right that Enki hopefully had a little more elegant way of navigating other than blasting nuclear weapons like his family Alalu did. But the interesting, again, the history story is always less important than the physics lesson that it teaches, actually, because that's the only thing that lives forever is the physics lesson. And the physics lesson is that the right kind of capacitance reduces radioactivity because it is centripetal, which is the opposite of radioactivity. And if we understood that well, it bodes well for the survival of our planet. And we believe that those same Draco Anunnaki ancestors actually had a type of blood chemistry which benefited from an acquired radioactivity. And so the politics of what we call the Orion Wars, you can kind of tell who's winning the terraforming. The Draco Uru lipid oil blood, they always want lower oxygen and higher radioactivity. And the humans, who are the oxygen breathers, require the opposite.
So
the chemistry
radiating this planet basically since Sodom and Gomorrah was one of the ones that was recorded historically, but there were other incidents in India. There's radiation, and now we have the modern era, and we've been nuclear testing for, since the 40s, and then now we have Fukushima, which doesn't appear to be an accident. It appears to be purposely they were terraforming the planet. However, we still have 7.5 billion people. We have a lot of life forms that are dying, but are we somehow evolving to be able to live in higher radiation as human beings? And maybe that's not quite working.
I think it's more accurate to say that going to a state where you need radioactivity to trigger electron transport in blood is a devolution. It's actually a reversion back to the more ancient Draco blood, which was on a radioactive planet. A real chemical example of that exists on this planet, the Iradia couple in Russia, born too close to Chernobyl. Radioactivity was actually a peak perception generating device because, as you know, in the Paul Brown nuclear battery, the electron transport of low-level gamma can serve as a metabolism accelerator for different blood chemistries like the Draco had, which I think brings up, what we should look at which is the blood chemistry of the ancients versus ourselves. I mean,
what happened to this couple that was close? I didn't quite catch what you were saying. What happened to them? They're able to live in higher radiation?
Yes. They grew up too close to Chernobyl, and their blood mutated, and they actually benefit from radioactivity.
Do they have more silicone?
Pardon?
Do they have more silicone in their blood, like the Anunnaki?
We believe the Anunnaki had certainly more silicone in their nerves. We believe their blood was a lipid base, which is oil basically, and that they were nitrogen breathing in and cyanogen breathing out, and they had more carbon in their bone and more silicon in their nerves, as the dissection of the Greys proved. And this high silicon in the nerves was significant because it made their wiring a faster wave propagation velocity, meaning higher frequency brainwave, which gave them more telepathy but less empathy because they couldn't embed the long waves. And the physics of that and why they then started the laws of kosher, for example, are understandable once you understand the chemistry of their blood, because for them water is the poison, so the water had to be out of the meat, and oxygen was a poison, so they always like to be underground in low oxygen environments, and radioactivity was actually needed. So they needed to design a bioactive field for their own survival, and that's what the Raise Hashem unto the Lord is about.
So they have, while they've been living here on this planet for 450,000 years, they've somehow adapted it so that they can survive, and it's also viable for humans to, be very prolific and breed. So how did they do that? Because we're here in this point, we're both cohabitating.
Rhesus factor.
Are they living under the rhesus DNA? But not everybody has it. It's only a small part of the population has the rhesus factor.
Well, I think you were right to point out that Enki chose the first humanoids, or the monkeys, based on the first time he'd ever seen compassion. Mm-hmm. And the monkey blood is known for passion. And Rh negative, which means rhesus monkey absence, is known for the opposite. The joke is we only hug our horses and our dogs in UK. The UK is the highest Rh negative blood on the planet. But it's cliche, but the fact is that the Uru, which was the Draco blood, was crossed with EB, which meant the bird dog, and that. And if you ask a Hebrew scholar today, he will say Hebrew means crossing over, and so it's not that we're all of one blood chemistry or the other, but we can graduate that way in our own lives. For example, smokers, by reducing their brain oxygen, cause their blood to revert more toward Draco. And for them, they want the windows closed and they want low oxygen. And eventually they actually thrive in low oxygen environments, which is very cancer producing.
Does that make it smarter?
Well, you notice that smokers do not want oxygen. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it is said that we could get a lot of the sort of plasma shapeshifters from the parasitic domains out of the U.S. Senate by simply pumping in more oxygen.
That makes sense. Okay, so I'm Rh negative, but I'm a very compassionate person. That's why I do this. I'm so dedicated to this evolution of consciousness. So I'm a paradox, apparently. And I'm from this probably royal lineage, so to speak, because I have a lot of the relatives and et cetera, et cetera. So just looking at that personally.
Well, I think, we want to be careful not to be cliche about this, but there's some basic blood chemistry facts here, which was that the Draco blood DNA was genetically weaker at the time of the cross. So to maintain the reptilian or Draco functions required inbreeding, whereas the monkey blood was by far more dominant genetically because it was more vital, actually. Right. And this is a report upon the Draco Nephilim problem, which was loss of long-term memory, loss of ability to take memory through death, loss of phase coherence in the aura. The way it would be reported in their terms is you know, if you want to be a guild navigator in Dune, which is to say, be able to drive your ship through the speed of light, you have to have a very refined attention. And the geometry of that attention, similar to what it takes to lucid dream, is lost after generations of cloning and living in metal structures.
So tell us a little bit more. What is the difference between cloning?
So as your aura loses phase,
Yeah,
say again.
I just wanted to break it down. Describe what you mean by cloning.
Well, I think Anton Parks had it right that Enki's other name, other than Samuel, was Nudimud, which meant the cloner. And in their culture, the only legal method of reproduction was cloning. And
how do we know
this was
because we have all these stories of tantric and tantric rituals.
That's the whole thing where Enlil was furious with Enki. I only gave you permission to make clones, not to make breedables.
Right. So he made breedables, but we have stories of
exactly
doing tantric rituals.
Exactly.
With and they weren't intervening to create even male or female. It was whatever came out, and they were so obsessed with wanting male children, and that's why Enki kept impregnating Ninmah over and over, and then she was pissed off. You don't appreciate women, and all you want is boy children, and get away from me. I don't want to be your.
Well, there's two aspects of the context there. One aspect, we know the culture in Pleiades, which was Draco controlled, which Anu took the family and fled from, was a matriarchy, and that's an origin of fear of women in every religion on this planet. But the other thing to know is that the necessity of having low-level radioactivity for accelerated metabolism in their blood chemistry meant an increased rate of mutation. So that's where the mistaken Draco/Monsanto idea that DNA that changes is defective came from. And that idea that DNA that changes is defective is the origin of the caste system in India and Aboriginal marriage law. And the reason they carve their genetic records, which are symmetry domains, alphabet letters on gold and copper foil, origin of the Mormons, because of their desperate need to prevent
hold on, you're breaking
DNA from changing.
Okay, so
and
again, you just broke up.
Their need was desperate to prevent DNA from changing because there was a higher mutation rate in a radioactive environment.
Right. So they wanted to maintain purity of their blood and purity of their form. And for what purpose? Why are they afraid of mutations? From your research?
Well, because it's very similar to saying they were afraid of letting DNA be set free. Mm-hmm. Because in fact, genetic diversity is equivalent to fractality, which is how DNA becomes smart and actually penetrates through the speed of light. Whereas monoculture and cloning is a way for DNA to become stupid and machines to rule.
Hybrid, what geneticists, hybrid vigor is what you get from diversity.
From diversity. And for my information, the whole purpose of creation is the diversification of the universe. And so if you have this species that's trying to keep it, contained, they're not following the universal law of diversification of existence.
Yeah, diversity is part of the physics of how DNA becomes time penetrating and implosive. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you have extreme genetic diversity, the DNA becomes what we call blissful or charged radiant, and you have the genetic diverse heirloom gardens where the vegetables are more psychoactive than LSD. Mm-hmm. And that's a condition that's the opposite of Monsanto. So actually, the old Draco physics did not recognize the purpose of DNA among stars. DNA is actually intended to make a centripetal force required for sustainable starbirth. And that's what, advanced shaman do. They go through the hearts of stars. And it is the title of Anton Parks' book, The Secret of Dark Stars, to understand that the large plasma field of the real high dragon ancestors were those who inhabited black holes. So stars...
Dragons. Okay, finish your thought, and then I want to ask you about dragons. Go ahead.
Well, stars make DNA for a purpose, which is to make the centripetal force necessary to sustain their assembly. As we know, 11 times the solar flares were dramatically affected by 1 million children singing the same song. It's been measured. We make a centripetal force the stars require. But the term Draco or dragon blood is actually, in ancient language, it's called Uru or Uras. You know, URU is the center of the term Hebrew, and Uru, Elam, Jerusalem, and Europe, Ural. It's the center of so many words, and yet we don't know what URU means. It means of the ancient dragon blood, as in Ages of Uras, which is the title of the chapters by Anton Parks, which is essentially the current, the sound current that runs through the ancient dragon blood.
So let me talk about dragons. When I was on Johnson Atoll, I'm a contactee experiencer, and Johnson Atoll is a military installation 800 miles southwest of Hawaii. And I had an experience in 1996 where I was taken to the underground underwater installation. And eventually, to make long story short, I was taken further down into the earth, and I was shown the dragon. And she was a giant, almost like a dinosaur, and just as large as a dinosaur. But she was sentient and intelligent, and she projected an avatar so she could stand right in front of me, and we talked face to face telepathically, while there were about 1,000 Anunnaki around me in humanoid form. I call them the tall whites, they were Anunnaki to me, and the military they were observing. So apparently there are really dragons, according to my cosmology, and you're talking about the dragon blood, and we have dragons all over, you know, the world. The image of the dragon is, and then there's the story that the dragons are one of the 2 original species, the Lyrans, which are humanoid, and dragons. So what, in your cosmology, are there real dragons, the giant beasts that are probably, the evolved form was probably dinosaurs, but they really existed.
And was it really feminine, or what, or was it androgynous, as we think the Dracos may be?
Back to you.
Well, no, I think we agree on that. The famous Thiuba books from the French tradition also confirm that the Thuban, Thiuba, Yehuva, a story was an androgynous high Draco culture, which had a devolution when they started replicating sexually because of the sex wars. But to say, the essence of what it means to say a dragon blood is the skill to inhabit charge lines in such a way as to grow the aura. So you'll never find those advanced dragons occupying an area of low capacitance. There are certain caves where it's possible to be immortal, and there are steel and metal buildings where it's not possible to be immortal because of the wrong capacitance. And so that skill to identify that dragon current is essential to maintain the blood. Mm-hmm. And that's a plasma field, which is what you saw when they projected the avatar. It's a charge envelope.
Okay. Go ahead, Sasha, you ask a question.
Well, just Silva says that it's under triangular-shaped mountains that particularly they find the right telluric lines, the right water flow, the fault lines that give them that kind of energy that they want. What do you think of that idea?
It's true that they would design the Earth geometry on a very large scale to create the necessary capacitance to charge their plasma bodies. It's also relevant that the flag of Israel and Alpha Draconis is the shape of the Draco craft, which are triangular.
Okay, so the Hebrew star actually represents a ship. Is that the form of a ship?
It's the flag of Alpha Draconis. I think Stuart Swerdlow is right that the human politics are a microcosm of the 22 extraterrestrial species that invaded the Earth DNA, and that we represent a puppet show for their politics. And Benjamin Fulford has a piece of that puzzle, as well as Stuart Swerdlow from Montauk, and I think they were largely right. And even Enki is talking about that in Anton Park's books as well.
Yeah, we haven't read Anton books yet. I've got them on order, so it'll be a week or two before we can get to them. And then there is a website which I didn't have time to digest everything, so we will have to continue our research.
Well, the blood chemistry
of the
blood.
Yeah, go ahead. You talk about
the blood chemistry part of that is the instructive science. There was the electron transport in the Draco lipid blood was a phosphorus base, which allowed the metabolism, and there was a red phosphorus and a white phosphorus, and that created the red Draco and the white Draco. The red Draco, as in the Rothschild, the red shield, and the white Draco kinetic, but was believed to be unclonable. But it was Enki's mother, Kadistu, who caused the white Draco cloning to be possible for Enki, and that's the first fertile female. So there's a lot of the story of the history is actually blood chemistry.
All right, so how do we get this entire story of the history? Because it actually goes back to the beginning of the cosmos, and there's many people that symbol it different ways. Edgar Casey talks about it. We don't have a full story of how we came from the highest level of existence down into 3D level. Apparently there's different dimensions, right? There's like many different multiverses and many different dimensions where life or existence can generate.
It's necessary. It's important to think very accurately when you talk about higher dimensions. The term higher dimension only refers to the number of axes of symmetry of charge rotation which can be superposed. The example of the maximum number of axes of symmetry which can be superposed in a rotating system is DNA itself, with 5 rotations in the thread and 7 more in the superposed braid. And so you embed in larger numbers of superposed charge rotation when the DNA is braided more phase coherently with respect to longer and longer wavelengths, which happens measurably in the presence of human bliss, which is a DNA imploding device, basically.
Right.
So your way of getting to the higher dimensions is to embed longer wavelengths in the DNA braid, and charge-dense environments and bliss process is essential for that. You'll find your blood bends magnetism better, and you lucid dream better if you have bliss access.
Right. And how does one achieve bliss access? I have my form of bliss access, but for our listeners, I'm a tantrika, so we use tantra to reach these.
That's a wonderful
lower,
tantra
or like vibratory frequency, and I'm trying to get my head around and symbolize this so that it makes sense for me. I can't speak like you do. I get lost. I'm translating. I'm a translator, right? How do we take what you're saying and put it into the terms that, because I have people that have no idea what we're talking about. And my purpose is to wake up as much of humanity as possible for this. Apparently, what we're going through is like an ascension process, is how some people symbolize it. So I want to break it down and simplify it.
Ascension is...
How do people get into a bliss state so they can ascend? Or
Yeah, well, ascension is just another name for getting longer wave phase coherence in your DNA and in your aura, which is that recursive coherent braiding process that happens in DNA in the presence of charge density, which is human bliss. The bliss process, or charge radiance or plasma projection, is a process of gathering charge. So Celestine prophecy was right about all human interaction is about charge, which Christians call grace or chi or orgona baraka, or living capacitance. The thing to realize is that living capacitance or plasma is intelligent. If you walk by a mountain and the charge in that mountain knows that it will get immortal by joining your body, then it jumps onto you. But the way the charge from the mountain knows that it will have a way to immortality is if every thought and action you're practicing is a perfectly shareable wave, which is to say pure intention. Another way of thinking about that is that death was only invented by biology to teach us to stop trying to store unshareable thoughts.
Well,
what that means is that...
What does that mean? What is a shareable thought?
Well, we know that the EKG coherence soars when you think a shareable thought. Pure intention is absolutely measurable, and I am the person who invented heart coherence, which is the way it is measured. It's simply that coherence gone fractal or conjugate is the perfected form of coherence and the perfected form of charge distribution, which is called mind. Charge distribution perfected is the only definition of the spiritual, actually, and what fractality is. To join that basically means that every time you think an idea or thought, if it contains pure principle, it will attract capacitance. It's the reason your hair stands up when you have a eureka experience. So if you learn to distill the pure principle out of every experience, that means that you will continuously gather charge and you will never die.
So what I'm getting from this is when you're sharing thoughts of oneness, like you couldn't share a thought with somebody like, I want to kill you. So you keep that separate. So it's self and not self. And that's Edgar Casey. The first awareness was self and not self, separation. So when you're feeling oneness and cohesiveness, then you have thoughts that are shareable. But if you become transparent and authentic with the apparent other, then you could achieve this state. You can say, I feel like killing you. And then you explore, why do you feel like killing you? And you can get to the underlying root cause of what's making you have that emotion of separation. So we're psychotherapists. So I'm implying this in how do we have these shareable thoughts? And so a lot of people in the Tantra movement and the conscious raising movement are talking about being transparent and authentic. And people like Alfred Weber,
that's beautiful.
Transparent society, transparent government. And if we had full disclosure, we'd have total transparency. And then we as a whole species, no matter what beings consist of it, could evolve together. And that's how we come to a win-win with even the Illuminati and the Cabal, if we become...
Well, it's a nice language, but it would achieve more precision if you used electrical engineering terms. What you're calling transparency is similar to the electrical requirement for successful death, which is the same way you enter a lucid dream or Tantra or Kundalini, which is charge compression. So the reason that the black hole of the death experience is medically documented to be contagious is because, as Ray Moody has proven, is because the death experience requires an implosion of charge to achieve plasma distribution. And to enter compression successfully is exactly what you mean by transparency. Mm-hmm. We know that during death, the Clouvet form constants, there's 4 specific geometries you see during the death experience, which is your DNA preparing to implode and compress your biologic charge to make the memory distributable, which is exactly what it takes to phase conjugate down to the center of a plasma tornado.
So, I think you talked about experiments where the direction of tornadoes were actually changed by focused attention by people that shared that attention.
So prayer is real. We can pray for an outcome or something.
Well, we've taught how shamans steer tornadoes by feeling their pain to such an extent that their bioplasmic streamer, their aura, embeds in the tornado and becomes the center of gravity of the tornado, because every tornado, which is like every wormhole in physics, is simply steered by the center of lowest pressure. And the center of lowest pressure is generated where the lines conjugate to. A practical example is that tornadoes will always want to destroy metal buildings, will always avoid destroying stone temples. The physics is that this stone temple feels like part of the body of the tornado because it's a conjugator, whereas the metal building feels like pain to the tornado and needs to be destroyed.
That's why they go for mobile home parks. It makes sense.
Well, the implication is stop making square buildings made out of metal and stuff.
Stop making metal buildings. So going back to more natural forms, and actually Maximilian de Lafayette, when he describes, and this doesn't make sense in his theory, but he said that the Anunnaki have buildings that are one with with nature. So they weave plants and life, into the buildings, into the structures, and they tend to be stone.
Yeah. And we have a curriculum for defining biologic architecture, goldenmean.info/architect, which is the largest biologic architecture curriculum in the world. And it's very simple physics. A building is alive for the same reason a pine cone is. Its capacitance will create a voltage difference top to bottom, and that capacitance will cause a seed to grow. And when you understand that, you can be an architect. Until then, you don't get paychecks.
But even the wood and stone buildings allow vines and nature to climb on them, and they cling to them, and they become one with nature.
Like Angkor Wat, yeah.
Yeah, like Angkor Wat, the trees actually grew up inside of the stone. So we see examples of how you can live one with nature with stone and wooden buildings.
I mean, and that's a beautiful poetry, but the physics is clear. If the electric field generated is the centripetal one that causes seeds to grow, then you've made a bioactive field, which is ultimately the only definition of architecture.
I want to go back. Yeah, okay. I want to get back to the death experience, and so we had a conversation before this show about Michael Newton Institute and their research, life after life, life between life, and you're talking about Raymond Moody, and you're talking about having a death experience. Oh, that was Silva. He talked about having the death experience. Anyway, you are touching on something that other researchers are talking about, having this conscious death experience. I've had 8 near-death experiences in my lifetime. I had a crazy mother, and she would do things, and then I'd be out of my body, and then I would see my guides, and they'd help me restore my broken neck or whatever it was, and then I would come back into my body, and that drove her crazy because I kept coming back alive when she knew I was dead. So I've had an interesting life. But tell us a little bit more about the death experience. And I'm making up your research with syllables a little bit, but go ahead.
The animations are at goldenmean.info/immortality. They're called the Clouvet form constants. And the Clouvet form constants are the sequence of geometries: cobweb tunnel spiral, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, which is the sequence of geometries archetypically seen at death. Mm-hmm. And we now know why, because it's a sequence of braid symmetry operations for DNA implosion. That's why you see that map to death, because your DNA does what it has to do, which is implode your capacitance to make your charge distributable, which also then defines exactly the electric environment required for successful death, which is the opposite of a modern hospital full of electrosmog. The electrical environment required for successful death is more like the altar at Machu Picchu, where the capacitance is a conjugator, the same way the Hopis knew their burial ground had to be maintained, literally a fractal capacitor.
So if you're going to die, do it at home and away from the metal buildings, and then you'll have a death.
In the pyramid or in the stone houses in Switzerland, there's a tube where grandmother is going through the roof when she dies, and that's actually a plasma projector, and it's real.
Plasma projector. And so you have something you want to say? You're looking at me. So if you're going to have a conscious death, okay, when you go through it and you have this more conscious death, the successful death, where do you go?
Well, Korotkov measurements were quite clear. Approximately 36 hours after death, the capacitance departs from the body as he measured, and then he measured where the plasma goes. And it goes to the place of charge compression in the room, which Castaneda would call the place of power, which is the place of implosion. because the plasma field of the ghost requires charge acceleration and compression to achieve departure. Essentially, the only way out of here is through the heart of the sun. The advanced shaman will have done that many times before death, seen through the heart of the sun like an eyeball, and will know the way.
So going through the sun. When I'm able to see ghosts and discarnates, I've always been able to see them. And so where are they? We called the Bardo, and so they haven't gone on because they haven't done this process. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they haven't found a way to be properly accelerated. A good shaman can allow them to use their aura for that function. There's lots of astral hygiene issues. But you will never find ghosts hanging out in steel and aluminum. They cannot.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so I grew up in a wooden house, which was built in 1830s. So
yeah, and there the plasma can breathe capacitance.
Okay, and it seemed like my house was over a vortex because there was a tunnel, much like in the original Spielberg's Poltergeist, where entities were coming through, and so I was dealing with them as a child.
The thing is that what humans are desperately needing is astral hygiene in order to avoid parasites and understand plasma projection.
So how does one achieve astral hygiene?
Well, take the example of parasites. If you have, well, the old story was, be thankful for parasites in your stomach if you eat dead food because they eat the death out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you eat a dead idea, like God is outside you, then you're going to need a parasite like a priest. In both cases, the parasite is serving you by eating the death out of you.
Priests are parasites.
Well, yeah. So that's okay. So you don't want to have, unless you're okay. So going the concept of yourself, God into yourself. Is that what you're saying? And what is God? What is
the point is that a very phase coherent aura is the only way to prevent parasites. And you ultimately only get a phase coherent aura if you have access to some form of bliss process, which is to say, in physics, you yourself are a parasite until you have your own source of bliss, actually, because that's the only time you have your own source of charge.
So how do you create a bliss process for yourself? What do you do?
Well, remember that the holes in the aura that result from drug addiction, for example, are measurable. It's not subjective, the GDV, etc. And bliss process, well, in my case, I started having intense Kundalini experiences around the age of 21 doing sacred gymnastic in the Gurdjieff school, actually. But then I studied the physics because I would probably have been hospitalized for Kundalini symptoms, but I was adopted by Bentov, who wrote the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini. And I did my graduate work in psychophysiology, so I began to understand the physics.
What is sacred gymnastics? Explain that so we know what you were doing.
Basically, it's a disciplined form of Sufi dance, the epilogue to the movie Meetings with Remarkable Men. The Bliss dance was so coherent that it burnt the celluloid of the film, is the story. It's basically the physics.
Yeah, go ahead. So you had a Kundalini awakening from this, and did you know what it was when it was happening?
Well, very soon thereafter, because I had attended all the Physics of Consciousness symposia. I knew Bill Tiller and Bentov and Arthur Young and Marcel Vogel. They were all friends of Buckminster Fuller. So I was hanging out in the in crowd at the time.
Right.
I was very fortunate.
I have a friend that's very Christian. He's having his Kundalini awakening, and he doesn't know how to symbol it. So he's trying to symbol it through, this programming, religious programming, and I'm helping him through it, but without, offending his Christian perspective. So we have a highly programmed society that's been conditioned and programmed by the major religions. And here they're having these intense spiritual awakenings. Is that perhaps because of where we are in the galaxy right now and in alignment with the central core? What's happening to people?
Well, Kundalini Kundalini is basically a way of inhabiting a lightning bolt without dying.
Mm-hmm.
And Krishnamurti and Gopi Krishna, they were crybabies. They couldn't handle it. But they didn't understand the electrical engineering, actually. There's a hygiene required. That kind of charge density stresses the water to mineral bonds. It causes very high metabolism, exquisite nutrition, remineralization, hydration, lots of issues. But basically, it makes you hypersensitive. It makes you talk fast. But the whole biophysics of Kundalini is, we have it, the article is goldenmean.info/Kundalini, including the sections by Bentoff of how he navigated from the earth to the sun with his Kundalini.
So Sasha you had your initial Kundalini awakening through yoga, and mine was through sexual. I had astral sex, and that was my Kundalini awakening with the man who was trained in silver mind control, and he projected to me, and I had this experience, and it's like, what is that? And then I had to go. I found the books and started to study it, and then I went into the tantric path. So, but apparently, so having sexual intercourse and procreating that way is higher evolved than the cloning, correct? So I'm going from the lower form to the higher form?
There's a haploid content of the DNA, which is similar to what is the sperm, which can be pumped up the spine with the sacral cranial phase coherence, as Bentoff did when he documented the biomechanics of Kundalini in Stalking the Wild Pendulum, his famous book. I was with him in his lab for that. He used a capacitive accelerometer, and the phase relationship of the long wave in sacral cranial pump delivers that exquisite nutrient to the ventricle cavities of the high brain. And I proved that the ringing in the ears that results, that crystallizes the ventricle horns, was a phase conjugate pump wave, in addition to the HRV and the sacrocranial pump. That's all in my book. So the physics of Kundalini is well understood for those willing to study. It requires no religious metaphor. It requires physics. And even there's a microwave content, which I have seen measured. It's based on the wave difference, quantum difference between ATP and ADP, which I have also proven is a phase conjugate pump wave.
So what do you feel is the fastest way that people can experience Kundalini awakening, and how can they find a support system once it's happening so they don't go crazy?
Yeah, Kundalini is a difficult and risky way, and I don't think it's necessary for all. People should lead a charged, disciplined lifestyle. You know, Jesus knew who touched his robe because it depleted the capacitance. Is the quality of grace. So the quality of grace or charge acquisition is the issue. And that charge density is beautiful in any life. And whether you have Kundalini from it or not is not the point. If you do happen to have Kundalini and you get the lightning experience, then you have more challenges, not less.
Right.
Yeah, in the Vini Yoga, what we do is on inhale, we extend each spine bone one at a time. Exhale, curl the tail forward and pull each spine bone down with your head in the throat hold, and then you suck your belly in and up. That's called the belly hold. You tighten your base chakra, that's the pelvis hold, and then you pump it. And you feel the energy going up the spine and out the head, so that you've connected with the center of the earth in your mind and brought that energy down on the inhale. On the exhale, you offer it back up, and so you feel yourself coherent with both the spiritual and the material, and you feel this energy going through your body. And it takes a lot of discipline to be able to move each of your bones individually, which is what you have to do in sequence in the system that I use.
I think that's beautiful. I believe that's called Mula Bandha.
That's right.
It can be a bit dangerous. I think the correct breath frequencies for that can be better documented now that we know that the exact medical peaks for the LF versus HF in HRV are precisely phase conjugate down to the Planck length. So we know precise breath rates to train with this, which will be part of the upgrade to heartsring.com. But it is true that you can essentially measure that process in the sacrocranial liquids pump, which is called a long tidal in sacrocranial literature, which I have also proven is a phase constant pump wave. So all of that fits the physics.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not, you know, I'm also...
I would suggest it only for people. Otherwise, they're...
The other thing that Chris Hardy and others have talked about is when a whole group of people, and you think you alluded to it too, put their focus on in one study in Cleveland, reducing crime in a neighborhood, or meditating together. And if you meditate together in a place that has the right structure, that amplifies things too. And so I guess, you know, world prayer or song for peace can really create that, perhaps, or at least influence it.
Well, no, that's beautiful. And that's an introduction to the physics of the Amenti concept, which was that in order for a soul to make it through the star, they must do it together. Step one, learn to meditate, and then to lucid dream together, and finally to collectively project their plasma through a star, which is the ancient term Dharana. Anton Parks defined as Stargate, what Uru Asa LM Jerusalem was. It's a designed plasma projector, and it's effectively the only way to graduate.
So let's go back to, we were talking about creating this type of lifestyle for this to happen. So you're saying, what are you saying? what can the average listener out there do personally to start in their own life?
They probably need to graduate to a diet of a majority of live food and a yoga discipline, and they would need an environment in nature with lots of charge and lots of grounding and meditation and peacefulness. Basically, the aura has to grow to extreme size and coherence. It's virtually impossible in most cities.
So living out in nature, or at least visiting nature for a great part of your life. Again, if you're living in a high-rise apartment, go look for a building that's made out of
brownstone.
Yeah, a stone or wooden building. Or what are they using now? They're even taking the skeleton of the buildings. We watch it here in Maui, and they're making them metal. So, you know, your regular three-bedroom house now has a metal frame instead of a wood frame for a lot of the buildings.
Yeah, which is highly poisonous. They should read the book Earthing, where you learn the physics of access to ground is access to a fractal, and that's how you achieve charge distribution and bedding.
So go out and walk naked, or naked ultimately, but at least have your feet barefoot and touching the ground.
Well, some of the things that we do here is we bury our feet in the beach sand up to the ankles, or stand on the roots of a great tree and imagine our feet, the energy going down with the root of the tree to the center of the earth. There's a lot of visualizations that you can. If you live in New York and go to Central Park, that might help a little.
Yeah, at least there's somewhere you can go.
That's beautiful. That's great. And then it's also instructive the way Jasmine teaches people to live without food, that in addition to all of the above, you need to spend a significant part of your day doing what you believe is your highest level of service, because that allows your aura to unpack.
Right. Gordon James Giannotto says that in order to ascend, we have to be 51% in service to others, at least 51%, instead of being self-serving. So give us some examples of what someone could do where they can move from being selfish to
well, everyone has an urge to be creative, but the ultimate form of creativity actually is the fact that at the heart of all DNA is the burning fountain of charge, which is simply a survival library. And you serve that when you create something which causes the process of survival, immortality to happen. It's called the burning fountain. So that urge deep inside to serve collective survival ultimately charges that burning fire.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Wow. Well, we wanted to keep the first show about an hour. Is there anything you want to say to conclude? And we can always schedule some more time, but I want to give this information in small bits to our people so that they can actually digest it, there's a point of, what do they call that? When it's over?
Retroactive inhibition. If you get too
Retroactive
much at one time.
inhibition. And Dan, you're brilliant, and you talk fast. And my gift to the universe is to take your information, Dan, and put it into digestible form so people can really get it, really grok it and understand it. Because I
thank you.
want to see this whole planet change to one where consciousness is respected and life is respected. And so, it is selfish, but it's also for the whole planet as well. And that's where giving and receiving are the same. So back to you.
Well, no, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to share. The core science book is at fractal.com, and the history story is beautiful, but it's secondary to learning the pure principles. And we everyone to embark on the hygiene story. The hygiene story is the first book. It's called goldenmean.info/conscious kids, in which we describe the hygiene for ecstasy. So thank you. I look forward to being with you again.
Yes, I will get back to you via email. I have a couple other people that want to come on with you, like Emily Craig. And so I'll talk to you then, and listeners will be back in the future with this show. Thank you for joining us for our first Zoom. And we're going to work out some of the bugs.
Blessing.
There was a little
Make
delay,
aloha.
but we'll figure it out. Thank you so much, Dan. Have a wonderful evening and good night for you. Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you, dear. Okay.
Bye.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye.